Hi guys, today we are going to continue with the second lesson of plants, and this lesson is called General Structure of Plants. Before we begin, we are going to do a quick review on plants and the basic information that we covered last time. Which adaptation helps the plant retain moisture? The cuticle. The cuticle is a waxy coating on outer surfaces of leaves that allows water to get entrapped inside the leaf. Why is the internal transport important and helpful? And what are the names of plants that have these systems? The internal system is important because it allows plants to transport materials and provide support and for the plant to be able to grow upright. It gives it more structure. And the plants with this type of adaptation are called vascular plants, and they are the majority of the plants today. Why did these adaptations occur? Plants started to move into land about 400 million years ago, and the environmental conditions were so different that these adaptations occurred so that the plants could survive on land. Okay, today we're going to start with the general structure of plant. So typically plants, you will find three major parts that plants will have, although some plants, especially non-vascular plants, may not have a lot of these parts, but the majority of the plants do. And that is the leaves, the stem, and the root system. So we're going to talk about these three parts and the different varieties of leaves, stem, and root systems that you can find. So the first part that we're going to discuss is the roots. So the roots, their job is to take water and minerals and to support the plant to the source of food. In other words, the root system will develop based on the terrain that is found. There's even some plants that are called air plants that don't need any support. But the majority of the plants will develop a root system based on the environmental conditions that are given to them, because their job is to be able to absorb the nutrients that it needs. So the types of root systems that you are going to find include the following. A taproot. So a taproot is one thick root with smaller lateral roots like a carrot. So you see the carrot there is the one thick root, and from the carrot, at the bottom of the carrot right here, you can see tiny little root systems, smaller roots. This taproot works by having the root go directly down and being able to pull water from that specific region. It's kind of like a well, if you think about how wells work. The second system is called fibrous. And if you notice, there is one centralized point right here, and from this point, many different root systems can expand. This fibrous root allows plants to be able to have multiple regions from them to pull resources from for things that they need. The third type of root system is called the modified roots. And modified roots are roots that will develop in very, very extreme environments. We have a lot of these types of roots here in Florida, so I'm going to talk about a couple. The first root that we have in Florida system like that is called the mangroves. And if you have been to the beach, you have seen these trees that grow in saltwater and estuaries. The mangroves, if you recall what a mangrove looks like, it has a very complex root system, and it looks like a bunch of branches kind of laying on underneath, and they're exposed. They're able to absorb carbon dioxide from the root system, as well as absorb the water, even though it's salt water. The second type of root system, extreme root system, like the one you see in this picture, this is a cypress. And cypress grow in fresh water, and you notice that there are these peaks coming out here. Those are called knees, and this is part of the root system. So if you've ever seen this before, you might have thought that these are sprouts of the tree. They're not. They're part of the root system. Okay, stems. So notice here, we're now discussing about the stems. The stem, it also supports the leaves and branches to have as many leaves as possible, depending on the type of plant, and is one of the reproductive structure of the plant. And there are multiple types of stems too. So the first one is called herbaceous. So if you see here, herbaceous, it's called herbaceous because it's soft and it's green. And if you see that it's green, you probably can guess what that color means. I'm going to give you a minute to think about it. And if you guess that the stem photosynthesize, you're right. The stem, as well as the leaves, are able to photosynthesize. Now, these plants typically are annuals. An annual plant is a plant that will only survive one season. So it's planted, and then once it dies off, it never comes back again. The second type of stem is a woody stem. Woody stems are hard. Many times they are covered in bark, and as you can imagine, the bark is basically a protective layer that allows this type of plant to protect its stem system. So the bark works as a protective layer for different conditions, whether harsh weather conditions or environmental changes. The third type of stem is called the modified stem. And basically, modified stems, kind of like the root systems, there's many different kinds of modified stems. So we're going to talk about a couple here. Notice that one of them is an onion. And an onion is basically a bulb, and it is underground. So it's pretty neat that the stem actually grows underground, and then the leaves will pop up on the outside like this. Another type of this type of modified stem is the lily. They're bulbs that don't always come back. Another type of modified stem is a tuber, like a potato, that is also a stem. So when you're eating potato, you're actually eating the stem of the plant, and it's also buried underground. And another type is the one that you see here. You might recognize this from your yard. This is St. Augustine grass. And St. Augustine grass is able to stretch out and grow vertically or horizontally. Okay, leaves is our last part. So leaves, as we discussed already in part 1, their main job is photosynthesis and gas exchange. So these two main jobs that the leaves do, obviously photosynthesis, they aid in photosynthesis by absorbing the sunlight and by having not only the chloroplast, but also having the stomata that allows them to pull the carbon dioxide in and the oxygen out. Another thing that I mentioned in our lesson was transpiration. So transpiration is part of the water cycle that allows the plant to release water through the stomata. It is interesting because the water actually comes in through, obviously, the root system. But as the water is being transported through the stems, from the roots through the stems into the leaves, you may have some excess water that the plant pulled once all the vacuoles are full, that water would have to be released. Also, sometimes it kind of works like a diffusion mechanism, that the water travels up and then some of it gets released by the process of diffusion. Okay, and we're also going to discuss the different types of leaves. And if you've paid attention when you go outside, there are many different types of leaves. And many of these leaves can help us identify the type of plant organism that we're looking at, and it's phyla. So leaves are super important, and they have a lot of detail in telling us what the plant is doing, what its job is, what the environment is, and what type of plant system it is. So leaves, there's a lot of variety, and with this variety, as you can imagine, they were all adaptations that came depending on what the plant needed at the time of where it lived. So environmental adaptations. So some of the environmental adaptations that you see here, you have here on the top right corner a cactus, and cacti typically have spines, or some other succulents may have a surface of like little hairs or other material to protect the plant, to protect it, because that's where the water is being held, and a lot of these succulents live in very dry conditions. So this deters animals or other predators that may want to have access to the water in the plant. Another one that you might recognize in this picture right here, this is a Venus flytrap, and a Venus flytrap is very interesting because it's one of the many carnivorous plants that we have. Now, carnivorous plants are not as common as regular plants, obviously, but there are quite a few. And the neat thing about Venus flytraps and other carnivorous plants is that they can adapt by either photosynthesizing or being heterotrophic and eating other organisms. And the last one, you might have seen it in Florida. You might not recognize it. If you do and you have been in contact with it, you're probably a very unhappy person, because this is poison ivy, and poison ivy holds toxins in the leaf, and so if you're exposed to it, you could be very seriously harmed. All right, now plants have different types of hormones, and these hormones allow plants to be able to communicate with each other. So there are chemicals that are released. I do not need you to learn all the different names of these chemicals. These are just examples that allow plants to have contact with each other. Why do they communicate? They might talk about the different environmental conditions or stressors or problems or triggers, and it also basically signals for reproduction. Okay, my last slide is about responses to stimuli. So as you guys already know, plants respond in different ways to stimuli. There's nastic responses and tropic responses. Nastic responses cause the plant to respond independent of what's going on in the environment as a whole plant. For example, the leaves might shut down at dark. The tropic responses causes the plant to change based on